Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of our Swift MUD tutorial series, where we're creating a multi-user dungeon game using the NIO framework and the Swift programming language. And today we want to work on notifications. That means that when something happens or a player performs an action that also impacts other players, then we want to send a message to those other players to let them know that something like that happened. And for instance, when a player walks into a room, we want to notify the other players that a player walked into the room. I think that's also the best example we'll start using to show notifications. This does require a bit of changing on how we're working. For instance, we have our MUD response and we have a parse handler, and that now only creates a response for the player who performed the action itself. And in our response handler, we're only sending out a message to the player that performed the action. And now we want to also send messages to other players. And the easiest way of doing that is, instead of having a single player or having a single MUD response as an outgoing message and an incoming message, we'll use an array. So let's take our parse handler, and our parse handler now has a single MUD response as an outbound message. What we'll do is we'll send out an array of messages, and there's a bit of work because now we need to change everything to arrays. Some of these are pretty simple because all error messages only need to be converted to an array, but don't need to let anyone else know. But all the other ones will be changed. So when we create all these that send back a single MUD response, we'll change that to send back an array. But first, also an illegal response should send back an array. Empty response should send back an array, and the default one as well. Also in our MUD helper functions that now all send back a single response, we'll start sending back arrays. No, that's the look command. There's a create user. There's login. And there's the go. And it's a bit tedious, but we'll get there. Okay, so those are the various responses, and let's quickly change at least the response handler so it can handle an incoming array of responses. And we have a slightly different way of working out. We now get back an array of responses, and let's do a response for each. Responses for each, and we'll get a response in. And I think we can reuse a lot of this code. Let's just check it for a bit. So we have a response, we have our session that we can reuse. We have a formatting. We have the string we're sending out. I think the only big difference now is that we're not just using the context, but a specific response, and the channel in the response. Response has a session, that has a channel, and that has an outgoing message. This might was a bit too good to be true, so probably missed a few here. Oh, response will be an array of responses. Does this help? Well, it helps a bit. We need a terminal. And most functionality still works. It's now still works more or less the same way as it used to, because we haven't implemented sending messages to other players yet. So what I think that we should do is we should close and create a second user, a test user, and close, and then we can take this. It requires unfortunately a bit of hacking. And if we need the users.json file, and we'll let the new test user stay in the same room as the first user. So I have a current room ID here, and we'll have a test user and add a current room ID with this thingy, and this should work. Let's quickly run it to see whether we can still parse the file. Okay, so we have a test user, and can we look around? Okay, so we're in the second room. Cool. So we have two users, and we can start testing now. Now let's see. We have our go function here, and it now just sends back the message that we entered the room. We're going to make it a bit more advanced. I want to have a helper function called send message to other players in room, and we should have a message to send, so it'll be a string, and we'll send in the player that sent the actual message. That's a user, and this will be an async function that returns a little list of MUD responses. Okay, so let's see. So we have our message, we have a response. We should get a list of other players. And to do so, we need to find all the players. Let's see, what's the easiest way of doing that? I think we'll have a user.filter, and where the current room ID equals to the player.current room ID. And I'm not sure whether did we implement a filter method? Perhaps not, but that's not a real issue because we can just add it. So we'll create a static func filter, and let's see what we're going to filter on. And where I will take a predicate, and that will be a function that takes a user and returns a boolean. It will be an asynchronous function, and it will return an array of users, and will await self all users. Did we add a filter? Did we add a filter to our awesome DB? We have a first, replace, no filter. Okay, no problem. Then we need to add a filter here too. So we take a predicate of the database type. It'll throw and send out a bool. It'll be asynchronous, and it will send out an array of database type. And we'll filter on the predicate. Filter on the predicate, and now when we go back to our user, we should have a filter method here, and we'll send in the predicate. And this should return an array of users. And we have our functions here, so we now have a filter method that can take a user, take a predicate, a function that compares the player's current room ID with the ones from the array, and now we have other players in room. Okay, so far so good. Now we need to make sure that these players, these are just players that are in the room, but we don't yet know whether they're actually logged in or not, whether they have a session or not. So let's create a second array called let's players, and we'll take the other players in room and filter on the let's see. Oh, wait a sec. We need to. These are all players in a room, including the actual player themselves. So if to get the other players, we'll take the all players in room and filter on where the ID is different from the player.id. So now we have a list of all players that share the same room. Now what we'll do is we'll take the other player and we'll do players. Come on, writing is difficult for each other player coming in. We'll see if that player is logged in, so we'll find another session equals session storage dot first where the player ID equals the other player dot ID, and if you find one, we have the session of the player, and then we can say we'll take we have to create a result. So let's quickly create a variable result equals and this will be a MUD response array, and we'll say result.append, and now we can create a new MUD response. We have a session, this will be the other session, and we'll have a message, and we'll say let's see, the message came in from this string, so we'll send this message, and then we will return the result. So coming back to this go, let's create a response variable as well here. So we'll create an array for MUD response, and we'll say the first one will be this one. So the first one will be for the player that's performing the action, and then we will send a message to the other players, to the player in the room, and we need to think a bit. Let's see, after this time the player is already in the new room, so we should say something like response append the contents of send message to other players, and we'll send player.username entered the room, and the player will be player, and then we can return the response. So now we should see whether a player is entering. Oh. And that's an asynchronous function, so let's be a bit more verbose here. I'll take this one out, and we'll just add the contents of that array. We'll say let's run it. Okay, what did we miss? Let's see, storage filter. Well, it takes, oh, this is called, yeah, that's a DB type. Do I need a DB type here? That's possible. No, that's... Let's just think about this for a while. So storage filter. This might help. Let's see if this is it. Okay, so let me explain. We're taking a throwing function, which makes this function a throwing function as well, and then it requires the try keyword. I use try with the question mark. That means if an error appears, we get back a nil value, and then we can use the nil coalescing to send out a default value, which will be an empty array. So if somehow an error appears when trying to execute this predicate, then we will send back an empty array. Let's see, it's listening. So let's log in. Telnet, log in full bar, and we need a second one as well. We'll log in as for the test user password foo. Let's look around. So I'm going south, I'm going north, and now we get the message that foo entered the room. I also want to send a message when somebody leaves a room, and that's something we can do. If we also make a list of messages, let's take the responses to the top. We still have the first response, our player. Then we have our enter messages here, and then we create an array called let exit messages equals await send message to other players in room called player.username has left the building. Left the room. I just really want to write Elvis has left the building, but come on, that's not that important. So if for our response array we will append the contents of this new list of exit messages, and now we should have both an exit and an enter message. Let's give it a go. So we'll log in as the foo bar, and we'll log in as a test user. Let's look around. Let's see. Let's go south, and the test user has left the room. Let's go south here as well. We moved into a new room, and foo entered the room. We only did this now for the go function. We can use the same thing, for instance, for the login. So we could say something like send a message to the other players in the room that somebody logged in. But let's leave it at this for now, because this message, this went on long enough. We now have a pattern we can use to send messages also to other players when something happens, and that's the most important thing we need to solve today. Next time we will start working on a speak command that lets our players speak out loud, and this is defined by you say something and then everybody's in the room can hear it. Contrast to whisper, where you whisper something only a target player can hear, and the other players only hear you're whispering something but can't make out the exact words. So first the speak, but that will be something for next time. Thanks very much. Have a good day.